이어지는 발표는 네덜란드의 국가응용과학연구소의 하이코 반더 하이덴 전략신사업본부장께서 수소의 가치에 대해서 말씀을 해주겠습니다.
안녕하십니까. The previous speakers spoke about regulation, technology. And it's always nice to talk about these very boring subjects on a Friday afternoon. Hopefully I can keep you a little bit awake because I will challenge you, get some new ideas. Because, as my previous speaker, Mr. Lee, said, it cannot be done alone. We have to work together. My name is Heiko van der Heijden. I work for TNO, and TNO is a research center in the Netherlands. We work together always with very big companies, small companies, 3,500 people. And on the screen behind me, you can see some examples which we have done in the past few years. The first one actually is about autonomous shipping, reducing fuels. And one of the ways to reduce fuel consumption actually is to automate the ship itself. And you can see here the first tests we have done with an autonomous ship. It's scary to see nobody at the steering wheel of a ship in the beginning. And as you can see, we worked together with different companies. The second project is about inspections. Underwater inspections are fairly complicated. They still have to be done. They require a lot of fuel. And so we developed a system with underwater drones. And one of the challenges underwater is communication. Why? Because Wi-Fi underwater, it simply doesn't work. So we developed a system with sound. And with sound, we can do two things. We can communicate back and forth, and also we can determine the position of these drones. So as you can see on the video, they work together even. Also, for new fuels means new materials, new use of materials. An example here, you see a composite tower. It's moving back and forth. This tower is 6 meters long. Hopefully we can get this a lot bigger. But for instance, alternative material for ships. Ships are typically made out of steel. Can we make them out of composites? Maybe. But on the scale, we have to do it to get it really feasible. They're still to be seen, but those are some of the challenges we will have. Hydrogen. Hydrogen, actually, we can divide the challenges into 3 different areas. First of all, how do we make hydrogen? Right now, hydrogen is made out of natural gas. It's not green at all. But we would like to go to a green hydrogen. And then we have the challenges of, okay, how do we store hydrogen on board of ships? How do we transfer it? And how do we do this in a safe manner? Hydrogen quality. So the first one is big scale. This is small scale. How do we measure? Because everybody thinks hydrogen is hydrogen. No, it isn't. It's contaminated. So you have to measure it. How good is this hydrogen? So in order to be according to the book. And still, as you can see, something went really wrong. And we found out that the safety measures we thought were very good actually were not so good at all. Based on this accident, actually a lot of the regulations have been changed. And unfortunately, probably in the future, we will have to do that as well. Hydrogen and LNG. We can learn a lot from these 2 different fuels. Traditional hydrogen was from a fixed place to a fixed place. So everybody thinks, what is the point? Why is it so difficult? But now we are switching to different use. Smaller productions, wind turbines, maybe local. Distribution is more difficult. We're going to use it on trucks. We're going to use it on ships. So usage is completely different. Instead of highly specialized people working with hydrogen, we now have people working locally with hydrogen, local fueling stations, which means different requirements and different ways of thinking about it. We spoke about this one already. IMO regulations, safety issues, different infrastructure, complex business cases. These are all things to take into account. There is no one solution fits all. To make things worse, every ship has a different solution. It's a different usage. That also means in time there will be different solutions for different ships. And unfortunately, we can already say, look, everything has to be green, everything has to be environmentally friendly, but let's face it, there are costs involved. And somebody has to pay for it. So it has to be economically friendly as well. So different solutions have a different price tag, CAPEX, OPEX, and that has to be taken into account. That means there will be a lot of new technology to be developed and to be introduced. Some of them will be retrofit, some of them will be new. And let's start with safety first. Everybody thinks safety is just one thing. The way we look at it at TNO is safety depends on, it can be small, big scale, and it can be high impact. And that depends on what kind of measurements you're going to take. So for instance, if it affects a big area, you will take measures much quicker. Even with hydrogen, a small incident like in the beginning of this year in Korea has a very big impact on the reputation of hydrogen. A similar accident with LPG would never even have made the newspapers. So there is a very big difference in the scale of safety. Onboard storage. Everybody thinks this is good, this is easy. However, when we look at the different fuels, methanol, LNG, hydrogen, ammonia, we do want to use these fuels instead of heavy fuels or diesel. However, you need space for that, and also the storage conditions are different. Typically, hydrogen and LNG, they're very similar. Either you talk about high pressure or low temperature. Methanol and ammonia are far more aggressive, difficult to handle. So your safety regulations or requirements are completely different and different solutions for that. The role of experimental validation of modeling. When we started with LNG, we suggested, let's run a truck over the hose. Everybody thought, you are crazy, this is never happening. In the meantime, we know better because it will happen. We found out the hard way that yes, when you run an LNG fueling station, it will happen at one moment in time. So better test for it. The same we do with wear. The same we do with tolerances. So when you implement, let's say, a fueling station on a larger scale, these are the typical things we have to take into account. Testing of materials, and that becomes more difficult. We talk about, especially for LNG, we talk about cryogenic temperatures, minus 160 degrees. Materials do behave completely different, especially when you want to move from steels to composites at that kind of temperature. It has to be investigated. There is not so much known yet about that. When we go to hydrogen, it's minus 240. Again, different. Also, testing requirements are different. So a lot of material has to be tested. And then we, of course, have the testing of the transfer system itself. Typically, these are examples from LNG. When we started with it, this was from a bunkering system to an LNG station. Always the same fixed ship to the same transfer system of location. Now we're going to expand that. We're going to use different ships, different locations, different requirements. We're going to do refueling at sea. So that means the usage of the materials and the systems are going to be different. When you look at the requirements, they are not yet fully there. There's still a lot of discussion. Okay, we're going to test a new transfer system, but what conditions are we going to use? What are the standards? And are these standards correct? Oh, sorry. Now, some of the examples we started with some time ago with a manufacturer. This was one of the first tests we did on one of the flexible hoses. And of course, the first ones failed. Because when you test these kind of things under cryogenic conditions, things are slightly different. On the drawing board, everything looks okay. When you start testing in real life, things do fail at places where you don't expect them, which is okay when you test things. Testing of pipes and components. The rate, everybody knows that, for instance, pipes and hoses are rated at a certain pressure. But what is the real pressure? When do they fail? And especially when it's at low temperature. You see here on the picture one of the burst tests we did with the hose at minus 160 degrees. It did cost us a high-speed camera because we did it in a bunker. But it gave us a lot of valuable information. Not so much what is the hose rated to, but when will it actually fail. Transfer system and components, you do want to have everything decoupled when it's needed. So also these smaller components, they have to work, have to be tested. So, and not just one time, also when these components are 10, 15, 20 years old, they still have to work. That also means that the testing requirements are different. There are different operating conditions, different lifetime. So, and of course, we have to look at the ship itself. No, we do not do every day a crash test of a ship. But we use this information to do the calculations and to check if are the calculations correct. And that gave us a lot of valuable information. In this particular case, we looked at rupture, like, okay, if the tank is damaged, that's okay, but it should not rupture, it should not break. And of course, we have to do that at low temperature, different levels of liquid, so we look at crashworthiness. This is actually an example. If we would put a tank either on board of a ship or on top of a ship, you do want to know, okay, if something drops on the ship, what will happen? Are my calculations correct? You can see on the picture as the stamp is coming down, the hydrogen, in this case it's actually nitrogen because that's the way we tested it, is coming out. So there's a blow-off valve. So we find out by the calculations, these tanks, even if they are so much deformed, they don't crack. They are heavily damaged, but they stay in one piece. And that means your safety requirements can be done completely different. And you can meet all the safety requirements. One of the challenges we have in making LNG and hydrogen feasible on a ship are actually the testing conditions. LNG, we can test with liquid nitrogen. Temperature-wise, roughly the same. When you go to liquid hydrogen, is minus 250, 240, 250 degrees. The only way to test that is with liquid helium, and that makes everything very expensive. So, and if you have to test quite a lot of components, we have to figure out, okay, what do we do? Of course, we can test with liquid hydrogen itself, but very often there are a lot of safety restrictions where you can do that because it is very explosive. You don't want to do a tensile test at minus 250 degrees surrounded by hydrogen in an office somewhere in the center of Busan because that's not possible. It's too dangerous. So we're looking at also different ways of testing. One of the things we do want to test, and actually that's why I put a sample up here of a tank, is, for instance, the combination of steel and carbon, steel and composite, because that's probably the future for the tanks. but also over there, a lot of work still has to be done. Fire and blast hazards, so because we are using more explosive materials on board of a ship, materials have to be different, has to be tested. So this is an example of some of the materials we used on board of a ship, and we look, okay, how do they behave under these conditions? Blast, for instance, blast tests, we have some examples later. We used to do tests for the hull of Navy ships, because if there is an explosion on board of a ship, you don't want the ship to sink, because then you have a lot more difficulties. So all about safety and new materials, testing of materials. Using of composites actually brings another challenge, and that is shock. Of steel, we know pretty much how it behaves under shock conditions. So when there is an explosion or like an accident, with composites, we do not know that much yet. So this is actually an example where we put a high shock on a composite to see how does it behave. Is it good enough, or do we need different regulations? Storage on board of a ship. All the Navy architects, they already know that this tank in this location, in the side of a ship, is officially not allowed. However, if you look at the regulations and do it cleverly, it is possible. We now have 5 ships which do have these tanks in this area. So regulations have to be challenged in order to make new fuels possible in an economic way. Some blast testing we have done actually for the Navy for new materials, and you see, and this was actually mainly about the connections between the various materials. Actually here we use actually knowledge from the defense industry to use for the marine industry. One of the other questions we got actually were from the firemen. They asked us the question, in case there is a fire on an LNG-fueled ship, how long is it safe? Until what time, when can we go on board of a ship? We said, we do not know. So what we did, we put a tank on fire. The first one, we said, okay, let's use a blow-off valve so that the temperature will increase, the gas can go out safely. And actually, as you can see in this video, nothing happened. We continued for 1.5 hours, still it was safe. So what did it learn? For the safety of the firemen, it was very easy. They have 1.5 hours at least to go on board of a ship, do the evacuation, or evacuate the surroundings to make sure everybody is safe. We repeated this test twice, one with the blow-off valve closed, still was okay. And the third time, we put the tank after, I think, 1 hour in the water. And then it did explode. So that means if a ship is sinking, then it does become very dangerous. So that gives very valuable information for the firemen to say, yeah, we know 1.5 hours is safe, and when the ship is sinking, better get the hell out of there. And of course, we work together not only in Europe, but also in Korea. And this is actually an example of what we are doing right now. With Gyeongnam Technopark, we are working on an LNG transfer testbed to test the transfer systems, to make sure it's safe. The material, the equipment, but also the people, and the people who have to work for it. So this is actually an example of a project we are doing here right now in Korea, and we work together with them. So we can work alone, but we have to work together, because there are a lot of things to explore, new challenges, new technology, new opportunities, and also a new environment every once in a while. So we have to look, and we are looking actually actively for new partners, new people who want to make this world better and look at new fuels, new possibilities, and making the maritime industry as successful as a lot of the speakers today also would like to do. So let's work together and see what we can do to make these fuels very safe on board of a ship. Thank you very much. 감사합니다.
네, 좋은 발표해 주신 하이코에게 다시 한번 박수 부탁드립니다.